welcome everybody to this ACAL Council for Adult Literacy and 2610 webinar. For those of you who don't know, 2610 represents the 26 letters in the alphabet and 10 numbers, and the organisation brings together business, community and the Tasmanian government to raise awareness and work together to improve adult literacy and numeracy in Tasmania. ACAL is very excited that 2610 has named 2015 as the Year of Numeracy for Adult Literacy Practitioners. And we offered to co-host this webinar to allow you to share this professional development opportunity and also to show the way to other state governments. Originally we thought this webinar would mainly attract Tasmanians who've already been working with David. However, we've been overwhelmed by the numbers of people wanting to participate. This webinar was closed at 70 people and we have 160 people on a waiting list for future webinars. This demonstrates the need for professional development opportunities, especially numeracy in Australia. So it's great to have Dave Tout available to talk to you today. Just a few technicalities before I introduce Dave. We will have a Q&A session a little bit later. Because there are so many of you, we can't have you all speaking at once and having sound on. It would just get a little noisy. So please feel free to interact in the chat box. You'll also see in the chat box a contact number if you're having technical difficulties. Please call that number if you need help with your sound. There's also, you should be able to see a small Q button where you can add a question down on the left-hand side in your chat box as well. We'll also be putting up polls during the session where you can click on your preferred responses to give Dave some feedback. This webinar is being recorded and it will be available in a few days, and we'll let you know when that's about to happen. Dave Tout is well known as an experienced numeracy educator in Australia. He certainly had a big influence on my teaching practice. I was one of those literacy teachers who was really nervous about teaching maths because that was too scary. But after a lot of work with Dave, I found that, yeah, numeracy is really good fun to teach and really useful skills to give to your students as well. You do that in a really very hands-on and real-life way. David has also developed many excellent resources used to engage learners in numeracy, and his work in the ACER has impacted really widely across Australia. Dave will also be talking to experienced numeracy practitioners Tina Begala and Anne Lesky during the webinar. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Dave.
Thank you very much, Jenny. And welcome everybody. I hope you can all hear me well. I guess I've been gobsmacked or staggered by how much interest there was in this webinar. Obviously, the idea initially was really to make some contact back with the people from Tasmania in order to follow up how they're going. But the response has been amazing, so it's sort of in a sense changed, I guess, what I might have done, and so I hope that there is something in my reflections on what's been happening with the 2610 work that I've been doing this year, and hopefully that you will get something out of it, and that then sharing some of the ideas that both Anne and Tina have got will also contribute to people understanding about teaching numeracy and mathematics. So I just want to, first of all, a little bit of an outline. So we'll do a little bit of a couple of polls, and so we can get a bit of a sense for who you are, where you're from, and then I'll spend a little bit of time sort of reflecting on what happened in Tasmania, maybe why it happened, so some of the messages I guess I was trying to get out there, and then have a discussion with both Tina and Anne, and invite you to, through the chat section, to sort of add in some comments or feedback about what you've been doing or what some of your challenges are. And then we'll have a question and answer session at the end. And I guess I should apologise. I've actually got a cold, so I hope I'm not too throaty or coughy. also sucking on a lozenge to try and ease my throat at the moment. So the first thing is that I and everybody, ACAL would love to know where you're from. So Anna, I think, is going to put up a poll for you to indicate what state you're from. So if you want to hit away, we'll find out what the picture is. I mean, as Jenny said in her introduction, I mean, I think all up, you know, we've had over 200 people express interest in these webinars, but also when I did go to Tassie, which I think started back in, I think it was March, we had a startup launch in Hobart, and then an initial workshop, and then I ran 3 workshops, one in Hobart, one in Launceston, one in Burnie. And I think over those series of events, I imagine we had at least 150 or 160 people all up. I'm sure Jen, who's listening, can confirm those numbers. So again, just from one state to actually get to and have some fun times with 150, 160 numeracy teachers was absolutely amazing, or literacy and numeracy people. So we can see the breakdown. If you can keep voting, the voting will update as you respond. So it looks like Victoria's slightly in front of New South Wales, and then we've got people from nearly everywhere apart from the ACT. So that's really good. And then the next thing I wanted to know is how you see your role in teaching and learning in adult LLN. Are you predominantly, as your main role, a literacy teacher, tutor, or an ESL, English as a second language, additional language teacher, tutor? Are you really your focus is a numeracy teacher, tutor, or are you a coordinator? Are you a researcher, or are you a bit of an odd bod like me? I'd be another, I imagine. Again, it's quite a nice spread. A few more to vote, maybe? No? Anna, can we have a look at that again, if that's possible? Okay, so the breakdown there. So we've got nearly a third of people consider themselves to be predominantly a numeracy teacher tutor, which is, you know, I guess given that this was advertised about numeracy, that's probably not surprising. But it still does show that a lot of people who are, I think, interested in numeracy are often from outside the numeracy or mathematics field themselves. They're often a literacy tutor, an ESL tutor, or a coordinator manager, and I think that's really interesting that you know, we have such a spread of people who are interested in numeracy. Okay. And then the next thing is another interesting question. So how much do you feel that you know about the actual teaching of numeracy? I mean, I guess predominantly adult numeracy, but some sort of numeracy. How many people think they know a lot? Who knows a bit, and who knows not much at all? Okay, so there's a lot sitting in the middle saying a bit, which is probably true. A lot of us would say we know a bit. It's good to see that we've got maybe a quarter of people who know a lot about numeracy. So hopefully when we get to the questions later, some of the people who know a lot can also contribute. And then how much have you actually taught numeracy in your the teaching that you're doing, no matter who it is you're teaching? We've got quite a few at the moment saying a lot. A very even spread at the moment. We must have been nearly all equal then. Very even, isn't it? again, I think that's really fascinating that, we, again, amongst this sort of group and this straw poll, that we've got a very equal distribution between people who teach a lot, people who teach a bit, and people who don't teach numeracy yet much at all. Hopefully, over the next year or two, that will increase. So I guess, what I wanted to reflect on was really this, year of numeracy for adult literacy practitioners in Tassie, and in, I don't know whether Jen wants to sort of contribute later, but, and why this happened. And I think it's certainly the first time that I've been, my claim to fame is that I've been around for a long time, and I guess I've got to know a fair bit about adult numeracy and teaching adult numeracy, and then ended up being involved in a whole range of different projects. And I'm still very, very passionate about teaching numeracy, but I've never had the opportunity like I've had in Tasmania to work with so many teachers over a reasonably long period of time. So in other words, there was a startup workshop, then a series of workshops, and then some webinars, and then another series of workshops in September. And I guess, therefore, the interest and the enthusiasm has been, the response has been enormous. And I think even the local Tassie people, to you and Jen, were also really impressed that there was such an interest in doing more about numeracy. And I guess I was trying to think about, well, why might this be happening? And I guess from my perspective, and some of some of my presentations is about, why numeracy is really important, why I think it's really important. And a lot of this will be acronyms, I'm afraid, but ALS was the Adult Literacy and Life Skills Survey, and PAC was the program in the for International Assessment of Adult Competencies. Both of these surveys I was involved in, conducted through the OECD, and basically both of those surveys, the ALS and the PAC, actually showed, I think, that maybe we could consider that we're okay in literacy in what we do, but I actually think the story in numeracy is significantly worse, that I think we have more significant problems in numeracy. And also, at ACER, I worked on the, if you like, the young people's equivalent of this PISA, which is a really big international survey of 67 countries around the world of 15-year-olds in schools. And again, when you look at our comparative performance in math versus, or numeracy versus reading/literacy, again, our performance isn't anywhere near as good. So and then I think there's other research that also shows that really numeracy is something that we're not achieving the same level of performance and therefore outcomes with our young people or adults compared to literacy. And I guess I'm getting a feeling that maybe there's a little bit more awareness out there that, when we talk about LLN, we shouldn't forget the N at the end, that the numeracy is really, really important. And I think, we might complain about pre-training assessments really being mandated now by ASQA, and that people have to do pre-training LLN assessments, and that people are therefore expected to do a pre-training assessment of numeracy. Again, I see that as another possible reason why people are now a little bit more of numeracy. I mean, I've this year started to talk at a few conferences, or being invited to conferences to talk to AMEP staff. People are teaching SESWI, because numeracy is now also being named as something that needs to be addressed for a whole wide range of learners. I think another reason, maybe there's a little bit, like Jenny said, that maybe numeracy and maths doesn't have to be seen as so scary, that maybe there's a little bit more awareness out there that numeracy and maths doesn't have to be dry and boring and sitting there just doing sums or solving algebraic expressions. So I think there is a lot more awareness. And while I was down for the launch of the Year of Numeracy, we got invited to talk to the press, and I was interviewed on live radio on ABC in the morning of the launch. I had to get up very early in order to appear on the radio or be heard on the radio. And again, we were quite concerned that people would take the negative view, which is what the press often does about the fact that, you know, how on earth can we have all these people who aren't very good at numeracy and mathematics? But I think the story that we're trying to tell here is that numeracy is really important and that we need to do something about it in a constructive way. And I think what 2610 is doing, I think, is really to be applauded. And I'm certainly enjoying doing that work. And I think the feedback we've had so far is really, really positive. But also, I think that what's been happening around Australia is, you know, is also showing that there's a significant interest in numeracy, and hopefully this will continue in the future. And I seem to be being invited to most states and territories at the moment to do some PD. So what sorts of things did I sort of talk about, and why, I guess, do I see numeracy as really important? And people who have attended any of my workshops will have seen this cartoon before. I mean, to me, getting the decimal point in the right place is really, really, really important. And I think there's research out there to now say that there's a significant number of people who probably don't know where to put the decimal point. And that, I know it's a bit sad that us maths people go around supermarkets and take photos of price codes underneath, you know, stuff on the shelves. But I thought by putting unit prices on supermarket shelves was supposed to resolve the issue of people being able to compare different products and work out which was cheaper. But this was my local little supermarket, and you know, this was why I noticed it. It's probably because I'm just a really sad case. But anyway, you'll notice that the price of this dishwashing powder is about 5 times the price per kilo of gold. So that container of dishwashing powder is 5 times more valuable than gold is, and that's because they've got the decimal point in the wrong place. So it should actually be 70, so I can hardly read it, $73.87, I imagine, per kilogram, not 7,380 something other dollars per kilogram. And I guess you, as a numeracy maths person, you assume that people who are entering this information, either it's standardized and it happens automatically, but obviously it doesn't. And I think it's an interesting observation that we make assumptions that people can do all of this sort of mathematics. And I think there's actually a little competition that Jen's running in Tassie at the moment. Maybe other people could contribute, or we could share this somehow, but it's about trying to find, you know, little photos or pictures, or find some situations where, you know, people have sort of had little mishaps with maths. And of course, us sad maths people, we look at it all the time. And as Jen's just put into the chat, yes, I think it's word busters and number crunchers. So, you know, share when you're around and about, the sorts of things that you might observe that where the maths isn't quite right. This is another cartoon that I share. I mean, I think that when we're working with adult students, whether they be literacy students, ESL students, or numeracy students, is that, you know, we often think, my goodness, this person's been through 13 years of schooling, and, you know, what on earth did they learn? And they've actually sat in the class and been taught a hell of a lot, but maybe nothing sunk in. And I think this is it's probably, I believe it's truer in math than it is in literacy and reading. And I think, to me, one of the really key messages that I try and say about teaching numeracy is that the really important thing is to actually teach why things work the way they do, that it's really important to teach for understanding, and to therefore go back and teach the way we taught maths in school through a textbook. Solving sums, just following algorithms isn't the best way to go, that we actually need to change the way we teach mathematics so it actually makes sense to each of our individual learners. And this was a slide where I've just sort of thrown a few things together, but you know, I mean, people often say to me, they tend to be maths people, that there isn't maths anywhere out in our real lives. We don't use maths. Whereas my attitude is that there's everything we do in our lives actually embeds some mathematics in it, whether it be sport, whether it be buying a car, whether it be about drinking and driving and all that sort of stuff. I mean, you know, supermarket, we often have some common things that we think are, involve maths like supermarket brochures, but downloading music off the internet, reading a map, reading sports fixtures, all of that stuff involves a hell of a lot of mathematics. So mathematics is out there, and I think the connections for our students need to be through the maths that they're meeting in their lives, and whether that be at work or in their community or at home. But there is maths everywhere. And I guess, from my perspective, some of the messages I've been trying to get out is that, teaching numeracy and / mathematics isn't about just doing the mathematics. That, to me, when we're numeracy teachers, we're also literacy teachers, and we're always language teachers. And I think the really important thing to me is that it isn't just about solving the maths and doing the sums. It's actually it's always about doing that in the context. And that I think there's research around that shows that it seems that, again, most of the research is about kids in schools, but that one of the barriers to students actually learning about solving a maths problem, not just a maths sum, is that they can't actually understand the words that are being used. They can't actually get the maths out of the context. That they can't, I'll use a term taken from PISA, we talk about they don't have the ability to formulate the maths, to make the decisions about what the maths is that applies in that particular context. And that could be through reading, but it could be listening to instructions. So it's all about, how the maths is buried within the context and excavating it out of that, and then making some decisions about what the maths is and what it means. Then, of course, once you've done that, then you can do the maths. So there are issues. You need to know the maths and do the maths and work it out. And as I'll show, and I talk quite a lot at the workshops about, the role of language in the learning of mathematics itself. What are the conventions that we use within mathematics, and what's the terminology that we use? And I think this is a challenge because often people have avoided the word of mathematics, so they don't want to have anything to do with it. So what do I mean more a little bit about the literacy? This is something that, this is actually from a project that Tina and I have worked on over the last year or so about measurement in a number of manufacturing industries. And this is a standard operating procedure for making, in this case, roast beef. And as I say, when I talk about this, having visited the small goods factory a few times, I still eat ham and salami and roast beef, despite having now seen how it's made. But you can have a look at something like this, and there's, virtually every one of those dot points has some maths or some numbers in it. But the ability to understand what that all means is a literacy activity. That is, you've got to be able to read and follow those instructions, whether somebody's reading it to you or telling you, or whether you're reading it. But, it isn't just the numbers. It's actually about them being in a context and understanding what the implications are, and then what you do on the job in order to solve the problem. And I think when Tina and I did this project where we mapped a lot of actual materials and instructions and tasks that are undertaken in workplace, I don't think we found anything lower than about ACSF level 3. That basically what's expected in workplaces isn't low-level mathematics. It's actually reasonably sophisticated and hovers often around working at least ACSF level 3, if not into 4 in many cases. But a lot of it is about understanding what the text means. Sometimes, like in the supermarket brochure, it's really obvious. Half price is pretty obvious. You can see a price, you can work out how much you save. But if it's 20%, if it's another number, then the maths becomes harder. And Tina just has put up on the link where that material is that I've just been talking about is available. So there's quite a comprehensive sort of manual, a guide, if you like, about measurement. And then there's, I can't even remember now, Tina, you better tell me, 6 or 7 different snapshots. And this was one of the snapshots. One of the other snapshots we had was of a Kitchenmaker, cabinet maker, who actually, the sketch that they take on the job, and then what happens once they get back into the office and talk to the CAD designer, and all of the sort of the aspects of the communication that has to happen between the customer in the house, the sketch that's drawn, the words, what they mean, and then again that conversation that actually happens back in the workplace to get that message from that sketch into a really accurate diagram. And if there are mistakes, if there are errors in the communication or in the mathematics, then of course the consequences are that something might have to be redone. So it's really important that things are done accurately and that people understand the mathematics, but basically that they understand the literacy, if you like, of the mathematics that's embedded within the context. Now this is a dreadful one. So this was another industry that I worked in that's all about asphalting, and this is a set of steps that when they use asphalt out of the back of a truck and they drive it along the road with the sprayers at the back and the bitumen goes out on the road, of course when you observe people doing this, you just think, oh yeah, they're just hopping in the truck and driving down the road, and then they come along and put the aggregate over the top and then the steamroller follows along. But in fact, that's not the case. Before they actually hop in that truck and drive it along the road, this is only part of the process that they undertake. And you can see that the literacy aspects of understanding all of that, apart from the fact that each of those steps involves a formula of some sort, and because there's this inclination within the non-maths world to not use formulae, so you won't see a traditional formulae appearing there. They tend to write it all in words, which I just think makes it a lot more complicated. So your ability to be able to read and understand that and do the job out there on the road is really, really challenging if you don't have good literacy and numeracy skills. So I think when we're talking about numeracy and doing maths out on the job, then the demands in terms of your literacy skills are also really, really high. And the second thing I said, so there is the ability to understand what the maths is, and then of course, then there's the need to do the maths. So in this other example from asphalting, there's these calculations that they have to do where they measure what they call the compacted thickness. That's the final depth, if you like, of the asphalt. Then they have to measure that, add on 20%, which is called the loose thickness, and then they put the steamroller over it, or they use one of those compacting machines until it's to the right height. Then they know it's the right density. And when I started this project, what they did was they showed the trainees, the people doing the Cert 3 or the Cert 4, that the way to calculate the 20% was to go back to school maths and write 20 over 100 multiplied by 225 over 1 and cancel down. Whereas when you actually ask people how they might work out 20%, there's all these other more informal in the head methods, or even on pen and paper still, like 20% is a fifth, so divide by 5, or 20% is double 10%, so divide by 10 and double. Or as some people might do is they say, well, it's really what I need to do is then add that number that I get on to the original amount, the 225. And so I could just multiply by 1 or 2, either in my head or on a calculator. And of course, the other sensible thing to do would be to in fact use your calculator. So in all of the training materials that was being used for these trainees, the only way they were being shown how to work out 20% was the first way, that is the 20 over 100 multiplied by 225 over 1. And it seems to me it's probably much more valid and important that we actually teach the other methods. So I think when we also think about maths and how we teach the maths component of numeracy is that we often think, oh, we must go back and do it the way we were taught it in schools. And I think it's really important to be aware that there's a whole range of different ways of doing mathematics, and your learners will all have different ways of doing the mathematics, and it's about sharing all those different methods and working out what works best for you. Now, if a student didn't know at all about what 20% meant, then you might go back to what I call first principles and teach them 20 over 100 and cancel it down. But I think it's really important when we think about the maths part of what teaching numeracy is that we don't just always think, let's go back to how it was taught in schools, because that hasn't worked for most of our learners, and let's do it in a different way. And that means probably not using textbooks and probably not using too many worksheets. You also notice on the side there, down there, I've said have fun and play games. And I think one of the other important things to me is that we can, in fact, have fun with mathematics. And I think that breaks down some of the barriers in terms of the attitudes that some of our learners might come with, where they've seen maths as sort of pretty painful and boring. And one way of doing that is to, play some games, and there's a whole pile of games out there. Now, the other thing the third thing I guess, when I talk about teaching numeracy is about the role that language plays. And I guess this was something that, having been trained as a secondary school maths teacher, I wasn't aware that I needed to also understand and teach the language of mathematics. And again, people who've heard me talk will have heard, there's some words up on the top in red, have heard me give the anecdote about a kid in the UK in a big research project in the UK who was asked to answer a question about volume, where he used the formula V equals L times W times H, and he got it wrong. And so the interviewer asked him, well, do you know what volume means? And the kid said, oh yeah, that's easy. And the interviewer said, well, what is it? And the kid said, it's the knob on the TV set. And so there's this confusion, in a sense, that I think a lot of students sit in our classes thinking, well, what in the hell is Dave talking about when he's asking me use V equals L times W times H to work out the volume of something? What's that got to do with the volume of sound coming out of my TV? And when you think of other words in maths, there's often these different usages between how we use them in maths and how we use them in our everyday life, like the word odd. Why are odd numbers odd? And what's negative mean mathematically versus what negative means in our real life. And then there's some words like quotient, which really we only ever use in the maths world, and that is a difficult word to understand and read and to write. Perimeter is another interesting one that actually came up in I think one of the Hobart workshop, I think, where we were trying to see whether words were consistent in their everyday usage and their maths usage, and most people thought the perimeter was a perimeter, that is the length around the external boundary of somewhere. And somebody there who was, I think, a volunteer tutor, had been in the army, and so he said that, in fact, he had never thought about it before, but in the army that perimeter is, in fact, an area. It's not actually a length, and that the perimeter is, in fact, a boundary for sure, but it actually has an area because it actually has a depth as well as a length. And so it's interesting when you start to think about it, how we use words in the maths world. And my experience with working with all my adult students over a long, long period of time was that it was often the language and the misunderstanding of the words that actually leads them up the garden path, and in the end why they can't cope and do their mathematics. So I think as numeracy teachers, we also need to be language teachers, so we need to talk about the words we use, get the students to even find out where's perimeter used and how is it used, what does it mean. So we need to encourage our students to talk maths, and of course they don't, because they weren't brought up in school to talk maths, especially not in secondary school, so they don't find it easy to talk maths. But you can keep word lists like we do, we keep spelling lists, keep word lists. Do a glossary of key maths words, play maths games that involve talking. Do word finds, play crosswords, and the Tasmanians will experience this in my next series of workshops. Play these amazing things called cooperative logics, but that's up my sleeve for the next time. Can't give it all away. I think getting towards the end before I invite Tina and Anne to sort of contribute, but that the important thing to me in teaching is that really, I think from an engagement perspective and also from somebody who's actually already out there in the workforce, or as a parent or a community member, is to try and find math that's embedded within a relevant and interesting context. I think that's the engagement side of things. So if people can actually see why we need to learn mathematics, and therefore there's a purpose for learning mathematics. And that's often the engagement focus, and I think it tends to work really well. But as part of doing that, it's then teaching the mathematics that's embedded in their context and how they actually decide what maths do. So the literacy of the maths embedded in the context is really important. If you're a literacy and ESL teacher, that's second nature to you, and so that's something that you can work on with your learner. I guess the other thing that is key in what I often say is that, try and make it hands-on and practical. I mean, it seems to me that making it hands-on means that people can learn in a physical, visual way, as well as not just learning it in like following an algorithm. If we have manipulatives and blocks and real materials, then I think people get a more thorough understanding of how the mathematics works. I mean, other research about what works in teaching, what makes a big influence, are about making sure that we don't do the same thing, that we actually vary our teaching practices and approaches. Another important thing that comes out from research is that, the need to use cooperative learning methods so that students are learning with students, so that they share their understandings. And of course, that learner interaction means that the only way you can interact is through language, and therefore, so that's a way to me of bringing language to the fore. And the last dot point there is have fun. I think if we can again make maths a bit more fun, then that's good. And Jenny's just said, what do I mean by manipulatives? That's a maths term. It just basically means something physical that you manipulate, can play with. That could be blocks, it could be money, it could be cut up bits of paper with different things on them, different fractions written on them. If at the end I'll mention all of the work that Beth, colleague and friend Beth Maher's done through Valbec. But most of the activities are things where you actually have something physical that you can actually play with and manipulate. I mean, it could just be actually, instead of just sitting there converting measurements from one unit to another, it's actually using a ruler and actually measuring different things and all that. So it could mean different things, but it basically means it's something physical that you can move and manipulate and work with. You'll see the picture down the right, bottom right, was the pictures of people in a row. People who have been to my workshops in Tassie and anywhere else will know that I often, there's an activity I do about people's arm spans and heights. So something like that, the manipulatives in that case are the people, and I think the more we can actually use the actual students in doing things, then the better, and they actually learn to relate the maths to themselves. Up in the top right corner, you'll see an image of a dice game called Multi-Digit, which was in strength in numbers, and that's about having fun, playing games. So I think it's again a crucial thing. So in other words, I guess a lot of my stuff is you can't learn maths by just sitting there with a textbook or with worksheets. So what I wanted to really have most of this session about was to actually be listening to what people have been doing out there, and so we did invite people to say that they could have a discussion with me or to talk about what they've been doing, what their challenges are, and what their successes are. So 2 people, Anne Lesky and Ina Bagella, who are now on the screen, we're going to have a bit of a contribution and talk as well. So I'm not sure whether you decided who was going to go first. Now, have we got a volunteer, Tina, or?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first.
Okay, all right, over to Tina.
Yeah, I wanted to share an example of the numeracy that I delivered in the workplace. It was at a mental health organisation as part of a WELL program. And they were moving, it was mainly a literacy program. They were moving from a very parental service delivery style into a more collaborative service delivery style. So there was a lot of oral communication skills around building those new sorts of conversational skills they need to have with the consumers they worked with, and new paperwork that they needed to fill out. And there was one form that they used called the Compass, where they worked with the consumers to identify 3-month goals, and then came back after 3 months and were then tracked where the goals were. And you can see on the screen there's an example of a compass that I've just mocked up for today. So there's some overall sort of vision, and then they come up with some goal that they want to do. So this, in this case, visit mum every 2 weeks, and then you identify in this model if you met the goal, what that would mean. So you're visiting mum every 2 weeks, and if you did that more often or less often, so overachieving and underachieving. And then when you come back 3 months later, you score the compass, and you and I'll explain what these scores mean, and you come up with a score at the end here. And the staff were doing wonderful things, implementing the whole delivery model, except when it came to this form, they told their management, they got together as a group and said, this form is too risky for our participants. Our participants are at risk of self-harm and suicide, and scoring them and giving them a score like 80 or 50, or what if someone got 20 might be enough to trigger a relapse. And management took these concerns seriously and were considering maybe using the form but not doing the scoring. And this model comes out of, it's an evidence-based model. The scoring is critical to the model. And they had a staff planning day coming up where I was spending the day with them delivering different sorts of training. And I said to the management, give me some time in the staff planning day to work through the form, and we'll see what happens, because I thought that maybe what was going on was that they were a bit scared of the maths involved in the form rather than the form itself, because when we thought about the day-to-day experience of the consumers get scored in all sorts of contexts by their mental health providers, by their doctors, the mental health sector is full of evidence-based tools where people get scored all the time. So this was no more onerous than any other scoring that these people were other tools that these people were scored against. So in this tool, what you do is you say to the participant at the end of 3 months, what was the importance of the goals? And you then come up with a value for each goal. In this case, we've got 2 goals of how important the goals were out of 10, and they must add up to 10. So 8 out of 10 importance of this goal, 2 out of 10 for this goal, and 8 plus 2 equals 10. And then you say, okay, for this goal, how did you go? And in this case, the consumer said, I visited mum more often. And in this case, which was reach out to my friends, did it less than 1 per month. So this is the raw data collected from the consumers. And then you just say 2 times 8 equals 16, 2 times 0 is 0. And then you probably can't read it properly down the bottom here, but you just multiply this 16 by 5, the magic number 5, it's always 5, and come up with this answer, 80. So, and what I did with the group, and they were quite upset by using this form, and so I said to them, I want to spend an hour with you going through this form. We don't have any consumers in the room at the moment, and what I want you to do is put aside your concerns and just trust me for the next hour while we go through this form, because I want you to learn how to do the form, and I want you to learn what the form means and what this number down here means. And then I promise you that we'll have some time to continue the discussion about your concerns. Now so what we did then was I modelled, demonstrated how to use the form. Then we worked on forms with 1 goal, with 2 goals, with 3 goals. I got them to work in the big group together with me, then smaller groups, and in pairs, and eventually individually. So very scaffolded approach to learning how to do the form. And within 3/4 of an hour or something like that, they were all very confident at filling in the form, because as you can see, the numeracy demands are not that onerous, and you're doing the same thing practically every time. And then we came to the discussion around this figure down here. And this model is based on a strength-based approach to goal setting. And the evidence says that if you set goals and you're 70% confident of achieving the goals, and you achieve the goals in 70% of the cases, then that is the sweet spot for striving towards a goal. And when you strive towards goals that are meaningful to you, that this leads to recovery. That that setting goals is not about attaining goals, it's about the striving. The satisfaction you get in life is about striving towards goals, not attaining them. And the magic number down here we want to get is 70. So what the staff really were struggling with, that 70 was a good score, 100 was not a good score, and 50 was not a good score, that we wanted the magic number of 70. So we did a lot of work around going back to that evidence-based approach and understanding more about what this number was, so that then they would have the communication, the understanding and the communication skills to be able to explain to their consumers that this was not a score of how the consumers were progressing against the goal. This was a score of how well, collaboratively working together, the service and the consumer had set goals that were about that 70% level, and that this score is then used to say, okay, those goals are a bit easy or those goals are a bit hard. Let's change the way that we set goals to try and meet that 70% sweet spot. And at the end of that training session, I said to them, okay, now let's have a talk about what your concerns are about using the form. And they no longer had any concerns about using the form, and they no longer had any concerns about the risk of relapse. And they then went on to implement the form from there on.
I mean, I think that's fascinating, because, I mean, to me, Tina, that's about what I guess I describe as the literacy of numeracy. It's, you know, the maths itself wasn't that difficult, although it's crucial. You actually need to sort of know the maths and how it all worked and what all the numbers meant and how you manipulate them. But what's crucial in this is, in fact, that understanding, and the understanding is through the literacy. It's actually this, what I sort of call it, you know, excavating, getting the maths out of the context, and then thinking about what, in this case, they're just numbers, what those numbers mean within the context. And of course, then it's crucial. There's a little bit of maths that they're doing, but it's then about putting the numbers and the maths back into the context. It's all about the context and the meaning. And to me, that's sort of, it's the literacy of numeracy that's really, really crucial.
Yeah, and I think it's, you know, if we think back to the ACER with the 3 indicators, and indicator 11 being about the communication, it was because they didn't have that understanding. They weren't confident, well, they didn't understand what the result was, and they weren't confident to communicate what that meant to the consumers, and they thought, and it was possibly because of their misunderstanding of it, that they would communicate that incorrectly and maybe then put their consumers at risk with their lack of understanding of it.
So, I mean, I think it's just a really nice example of how, you know, numeracy, well, it's you know, crucial. I mean, I think whenever you start to look at numeracy within the health area, you know, it actually has impacts on people's lives. So it's really important from a medical perspective or a health perspective to actually understand what the numbers mean and how they're being used, so that people can then react to it. So it's a really simple example of, you know, what I see as numeracy, you know, where in some cases the maths isn't terribly sophisticated, and probably in terms of ACSF levels, you could say just the sums that they're doing there is probably at ACSF level 1. But the reality is indicators 1 and 2, that is 1 and 3 from the ACSF, you know, 9 and 11, are the ones about getting the maths out of the context, understanding what they mean, and then the third one, as you said, about the representation, the communication, are really crucial. And sometimes we can just focus in, oh, yeah, the maths is here, therefore it's ACSF level 1, and it's often the other indicators that really bump it up.
Yeah, and when I suggested to management that people might be struggling with the maths on this form, the management said, oh, that's ridiculous. The maths what's wrong with people? They don't even need a calculator to do that. And we're talking about people with a certificate 4 in community services and mental health. So we're, you know, talking about, you know, people who are working at a certain level, and they're all functioning very well in their jobs, but this form was really stumping them.
That's really a good example. Thank you very much. I mean, if anybody else has got any other questions to Tina, make sure you put them into the chat box, and then we can, Tina can keep an eye out on that, or Jen will let us know. So maybe we should go back to Anne. Anne, do you want to share with us your sort of what you wanted to talk about? I know, again, Anne's had a hell of a lot of experience, so I'm sure she could talk about a lot of things, but talk about the one that you thought you might like to share with us.
Thanks, Dave. My experience is based on a group of adult learners that I was teaching last year. The context was they were returning to learning after a long period away from education. Excuse me, I have a similar issue today, but it is going to make me cough, I think. But the adults were all in the situation where they walked in feeling quite glum about numeracy and expressing the common statements about not being able to do it and not being able to understand it. So I had experienced a number of different inspiring professional developments from Dave, and also read Tina's work, and also enjoyed Strength in Numbers by Beth Ma. And I'd started to trial a whole lot of different strategies and approaches. But this time, when it came to numeracy, in the past I used to find an interesting article and then look for the numeracy that's embedded. But I thought this time I'm just going to flip it around and make numeracy drive the literacy, and also flip it around so that I'm not leading what we're going to be discussing. Let the learners lead what we're going to be discussing. So I introduced numeracy in the news. And initially, I did commence by just giving them an example, something that I'd just heard on the radio on the way to work, and I thought it might be of interest to them. And naturally, because I knew the students, I'd been able to identify something they were interested in. But the whole idea really took off because I encouraged them just to listen to the news, access the news wherever they were and through whatever medium they could. I didn't expect them to go and buy the newspaper, but whatever way it came to them, I let them just encourage them to jot down the numbers that were involved and a few key words. And they started to bring these into our sessions. And so it was really interesting to see the spread of numeracy that came in, because it was driven by what they were interested in. So you'd get a coverage of things about things that relate to humans and life. So they talked about a fundraising that was happening in our community, and it was relevant to one of the members there. It was a cycling event. The people were going to ride hundreds of kilometres from one place to another. They hoped to raise certain amounts of dollars. And so whatever came in, I would then use as a way of exploring what the numeracy concepts were, what the numeracy language was, looking at what we could find out from that information, pose some problems, encourage them to explain what they know about it and how they might calculate whatever the problem was that we posed. So I'll give you some examples of things that we covered. So there were personal and life issues. Price of petrol often came up. In our community, we had a new hospital. We have a new hospital being built. So there's lots of interest in the helipad that's being placed on the top. So we had fantastic measurements to explore, which talked about the weight of the concrete that has to sustain the weight of the helicopter. So all of this was revealed through the news. So we had cubic metres, volume, height, so lots of measurement involved with that. Regionally, we were experiencing upgrades to the Hume Highway. So that involved time, distance, cost, comparisons. We also, there's a lot of information available about expected workplaces, or workplaces that are expected to employ percentages of the population or numbers of the population, percentages of employed and unemployed. Nationally, last year there was discussion about driverless cars, So we looked at the survey results. Somebody brought in the fact that at that stage the country of origin labelling and food labelling was coming in, so we started to look at food labels and the percentages and grams and measurements. And then last year, I don't know if you remember, but NASA's New Horizons spacecraft was starting to take the first images of Pluto, which was 4.8 billion kilometres away, and so we started getting into some really big numbers. But I guess it really took off, and my observation was that it started to drive most of the session that I had with them. It began very small, and then they competed to get their numbers up on the board and for something for us to discuss. But my primary goal was always to promote the discussion and interaction, to encourage those estimation skills, those in-the-head skills, to hear how they would calculate and check on their strategies and approaches to the calculation. We'd often be exploring place value. I'd also equivalence, look for opportunities to build that understanding of the equivalence between percentage, fractions, decimals, and just hear them speaking and using the language of numeracy more often with a more positive spin and enthusiastic approach. It was really worth it. My goal was, they were all below ACSF level 3, so I had ACSF level 3 units that I was to deliver. Although it sounds like it was haphazard, in a way it was, because I didn't know what was coming in, but I'd often reflect or revise on a particular aspect before we'd zoom into another area. So it wasn't just a one-off dealing with this, it was often, let's explore what we can now, and then we'll follow up with such and such.
Again, like Tina's, quite a different example, but it's it's a really, I think, really important that we actually acknowledge and help our students to actually realise that yes, maths is out there. It's embedded in everything that we do, and I think one of the things I do at these workshops, which I did in Tassie, was I always buy the local daily paper, and every time I've done that, the main article on the front page of the local daily newspaper always has some maths and numeracy embedded in it, and I haven't yet been caught out. And it's that aspect that, in fact, numbers are crucial to understanding the meaning of any text, and this is in the news as well. But learners don't always, aren't aware of it, and often what they'll be doing is looking at it, and it won't make meaning because, in fact, the numbers don't make meaning. And like, the billion of light years, and what the hell does that mean? I find it hard to comprehend. So it's sort of like, if we can alert learners to the fact that, numbers are just part of our lives, then I think they get excited as well. And I think it's, I guess to me, a frustrating aspect of working with adults is that they're so negative about maths, and so therefore things that we just take as literate people as being just part of our lives, we just read and take them on board. And I think that if they can realise that in fact it's all around us. It doesn't have to be seen as being really difficult, and it's accessible. And what we need to do is sort of engage with it and talk about it and share it, and it can be fun and exciting, and we learn a lot at the same time.
Yes, totally agree.
So I think time's getting on, isn't it? So. A few people have been putting up questions. So anybody got any specific? I think, Tina, you're still alive?
Still around,
yep.
Yes.
So, in a sense, the questions can be to, I think, any of the three of us. And to me, one of the other important questions, I'll go on to a couple of slides, was whether people have sort of had any challenges in what they've been trying to implement. I've got a series. I might go through all three, and then people can put in, some questions. I mean, there's one there I think already from Lisa. But if you haven't tried to teach more numeracy, and math, why not? I mean, maybe these stories of I think really good illustrations from both Tina and Anne are about the fact that it is accessible, and if you're teaching literacy in ESL, you can integrate the numeracy in what you're doing. And so what are some of the barriers? So for those people, especially earlier, who said that they weren't teaching much numeracy yet, are there issues that are, stopping you from doing it? And I think to me, part of it is about not really going out and looking for the maths per se, or thinking of the maths and where is there a context. It's about just having a look at, again, a bit like, what Anne was saying. It's about just taking common things that are around us that you do know your students are probably going to be interested in, and working with those.
Yeah.
It doesn't have
Dave,
yep.
Yeah, Jen here. I notice Karen has taken up, I've typed it's actually about enlivening numbers and bringing them out of, I meant to say them out of the creaky cupboard of mathematics.
Yeah.
So Karen's challenge is, I've heard that before, but how do you do it? I think, is that right, Karen? That was what you were wanting to get across?
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me maybe Karen can sort of type some more. It seems to me that it's about how the numbers, how the maths is just how we use them in anything and everything we're doing. And I think Anne's experience is that it is there, and once you make students aware of it, then they will find it themselves. There's a project in Ireland where they talk about seeing the world through mathematical eyes, or with a mathematical lens, and I think that's a nice way of sort of thinking about it. It's actually changing people's perception of how they look at maths, and I guess that's what I see numeracy as. It's actually looking at the world in a different way, but still with a bit of a mathematics lens. And I think too many of us the polarization is so strong that we don't. The filter, if you like, is so strong that anything that's maths we avoid. So it's finding that way to sort of get the students interested, so that they'll say, "Oh yeah, this isn't so hard."
And I think Barbara's perhaps honed in on what Lisa was trying to say from people from the vet sector, that challenge of trying to fit fun and that freedom for students to find the numbers themselves that Anne talked about in the context of the vet sector and prescribed assessments, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like that, I mean, some of the stuff I showed you from the asphalting industry, I mean, it's true, I think, in any of the workplaces I've gone into, is that it's full of mathematics. And I think, but people are so sort of scared and apprehensive, and have this view that mathematics equals maths, like I sat there in years 7, 8, 9 and 10 at school, that I never understood and grappled with. And so they have this lens, if you like, where they see maths as just doing that. And I think it's about trying to say, or break down the barriers to say, but this maths is crucial in terms of me doing my asphalting job, or it's crucial in terms of me making the salami at work. And how can I connect that maths in a real way to what my job is, which is sort of what Tina in her example was. And to me, there's again, when I have hours to do a workshop, we still can't ignore the fact that we still need to teach the maths bit. So there still is that role of teaching how to work out 20%. And to me, part of that is that you need time in that training, even within a vet course, to play the maths games, to play the dice games, because through playing those games and those maths activities is how you get to the understanding of what maths means, and how you become a little bit confident in actually playing the maths game, if you like. So part of I always say it's a bloody hard job being a numeracy teacher, because you're not just a maths teacher, you're also a literacy teacher and a language teacher. And you've got to be aware of all of those challenges. So part of your role is still to somehow teach the understanding behind whatever the mathematics is that's there. So I think if we go back, and we are probably going to run out of time, so to really your whole program, Jen, and about 2610 and making numeracy a key message for this year, it's about saying that it's not a quick fix, and that you need a sustained effort in order to work out how to address the issue. And that means that the vet trainers, the curriculum writers, the training package writers also need to realise that time and effort and attention needs to be given to the complexity of what numeracy it is. It isn't just about the fact that you can work out 20% of something. It's actually about all of the examples that Tina and Anne shared, and examples I use in the workshops. It's about doing the maths within the context. And that's what people really struggle with. You might be able to give them a worksheet with 20% calculations and they might get it right, but put them on a job, they can't do it because they don't know what it means in that context. Like Tina's example was brilliant in showing how the mathematics isn't complicated, but the context makes it complicated. So it's not an easy job, and I think it's a really important job, and I think there's a lot of barriers in the way of people being able to use confidently use any math skills that they have on the job, because schools in some ways have beaten out of us that ability to connect maths with the real world. And we almost have to start again. But part of that is still playing in the world of mathematics.
Yes, and I think it's a delicate dance. And because if you go into the equations that underpin the Ashfelting, you could take people back to the traumatizing part of math and think, I can't do my job now. I could work it out before.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I've noticed and why people get quite excited after your workshops is they've almost been set free of, and you're allowing, because we have in these groups volunteer tutors through to quite experienced practitioners, and there's a fear factor there for a lot of the people in the workshop, and then there's how you do give people the actual skills as well. So, and I've just see Tanya brings up, and it's probably more a vet sector thing, RTOs and compliance. So,
I mean, I was going to say something both to Lisa and to Tanya. I mean, and it's another whole issue really. And I mean, I as somebody who's worked in vet sector for a long time, and I mean, and know a reasonable amount about assessment. I get very, very frustrated with compliance aspects of what we're expected to do, and I think that drives bad practice, not good practice. But it is another whole discussion, unfortunately. But I do think it's very frustrating at the moment, the way that we are expected to conduct assessments and report on and document assessments. I think that stops us from doing. The system is stopping us from doing what we think is good practice, and I think there are a lot of challenges about assessment in the vet sector at the moment.
Yes, this is another layer of that is another layer of complexity over already something that's going to require quite significant systemic change. And it's wonderful that you in Tasmania, we're delighted, Dave, that you're willing to come and visit us so often and contribute. And I'm glad that it's something that you get satisfaction from too.
Yes, I wouldn't be doing it if I and didn't really enjoy the interactions. Every time I run these workshops, I get as much out of it as hopefully as the participants, because it's there's always so many fantastic practitioners out there, and I think it's true in the school sector, because I do a fair bit of work back in the school sector now too. But I actually think the level of support that teachers and trainers get at the moment is not high in terms of educational practice. I think we have there's sort of support for compliance issues, but to me the important thing is how we work with and engage with our learners so that they learn successfully. That's what education's about. But the vet sector in particular, we seem to have gone down this weird path, and it's very frustrating. So I just so enjoy working with with teachers about my passion, which is about numeracy and mathematics.
That's much appreciated. Are there any last questions? I think we've got to 1:45. Yeah.
I mean, nobody's sort of, apart from the questions about damn compliance, anybody who is still sort of sitting there haven't quite put their toes in the water yet about teaching numeracy or mathematics. Anything about what the barriers are, what your challenges are, why you may not be doing it? Because it seems to me that's still, and I think, I mean, hopefully, you know, what you're saying, Jen, is that when people actually come to these sessions, and maybe some of their fears are overcome, is that it doesn't have to be as scary as it is. I think it's about having some strategies, and I guess what I tried to share in my reflections is that this isn't about maths and doing sums, and because sometimes literacy and ESL teachers themselves feel inadequate about their own maths literacy, but when you realise that it's as much, I believe, about the literacy and language, then that is something that you're already experienced in. And then if you need help with the maths content, then go and find a colleague that can help you with the actual teaching of mathematics. And the internet's fantastic these days. We do have a lot of resources at our fingertips. But
the other thing that I noticed, Dave, was that particularly if you're teaching people who are generally ACSF level 1 or 2, your own maths is enough.
Yeah, that's right.
That confidence up that you can make quite significant, and that's when your general knowledge, your knowledge around teaching adult literacy comes in as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've been really privileged over the years to basically work in sort of literacy and ESL departments as the numeracy maths, often the one and only numeracy and maths person. But I've learned so much from working with those colleagues. So a lot of, I guess, you know, if you like, my philosophy of teaching numeracy and mathematics is what I've picked up from a lot of literacy and ESL colleagues, and then working with marvellous people like, you know, Beth and Betty and a whole range of other people around the trap. So it isn't just my message, it's what I've picked up from a whole lot of other amazing people that I've been lucky to work with. And I still pick it up. I mean, you know, every time you run a workshop and you have that time when it's not just the hour here and the hour there. I mean, that's, I think, the benefit of the whole day workshops and getting back to see people is that then they come back and they teach me things too.
Yes, very clear it needed to be an iterative process.
I mean, I know Sinead just sort of said sometimes tell me that they aren't sure how to deliver the concepts in a way. And I think that is the challenge. I mean, in a sense, that's the maths challenge. Is then how do I teach 20%? Sometimes, I guess to me, it's often admitting that, you know, you don't know. And if you've got a group of learners that you're working with, ask them to share it with each other, how they work out 20%. And I always say they'll come up with probably better ways than you know of how you might do something like that. So be open to sort of letting the learners actually share their different ways and let them teach each other. And often by one of them teaching somebody else, it reinforces their own skills and gives them a sense of achievement too. So I actually think it's about, I tell the anecdote in these workshops about, you know, one of my supervisors when I was doing my teacher training saying the best thing he heard me say was that it actually admit to some students that I actually didn't know the answer. And he said if all teachers actually went out into the world thinking that they didn't know everything, and we'd all be better teachers. And I think if we keep that, and we are working with adults, so I mean, there will be people in the group who know how to do things better than we do, and let's use that knowledge and share it.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Dawn and Jen, for that question and answer session. There are probably some other screens that are still to come up, so you might want to watch your screen for a little bit longer before you depart, everybody. So there's some links to resources, which I know you'll all want to have a look at after that discussion and delve into what all the strategies are, and also some contact details to David there as well. Thank you very much for participating. I'd like to especially thank Dave for presenting, to Tina and Anne for participating, and Jennifer Dunbabbitt and Hugh Fielding of 2610 and the Tasmanian Government for their assistance in offering this webinar. I must also thank Anna and Anna Musgrove and Donna McDowell and Redback for their assistance in preparing and presenting this webinar. Through their technical assistance, this webinar will be available to hear again very soon. You'll be notified when this is available. Please take some time now to complete the survey that'll appear that's on your screen to assist us in planning further webinars or professional development opportunities for you. And just as Dave's been talking there, I've sort of been thinking, wouldn't it be great if we had a way that numeracy practitioners across Australia could talk to each other and ask each other questions. So on behalf of ACAL and 2610, thank you very much to you all for attending and Dave for presenting as well. Thank you.
Thank you.